So we're back from lunch, and I'm recording the lecture again. So I don't have the morning stuff uploaded yet. I'm going to wait till everybody gets off the internet later, and my internet speed will be faster. And I'll upload all of the previous morning stuff. But this is now the afternoon session, and this afternoon we're going to write some source code. So you have your tools installed and you're ready to go, and we left off the lecture this morning on this pencil example. So I'm going to start in with the pencil example. And pencil example along with create pencil. So open up Eclipse. That's the easy part. So I've actually, during the break, I noticed that some of the icons aren't purple. They look like opening and closing comments, and they're green and black or something. So your icon probably might look different than this. This is, again, the purple icon that comes with Eclipse. And I get this little Eclipse thing that comes up. Yours might say Android on it. It's the same program, don't worry about it. However, I guess we're going to find out right now if it's the same program. So I have this also installed in the Windows partition, and I have the Android version on that one. So if we need to, if the menus are very different, we can switch back and forth, but it should be very similar. So you're opening up Eclipse, and you're presented with this very unuser-friendly looking screen. Nothing on it. So I want you to click on the File menu and click on New. And do we see Java Project at the top? Everybody see Java Project at the top of your screen too if you have the bundle? Because I'm kind of cross-checking right now. Do you have the bundle, or are you working with Eclipse? The bundle? So it's the Android one? You have the Android one. Do you have the... Does your menu look like this? Yeah. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, good. That's all I needed to know. All right, so Java Project. Go ahead and select Java Project. We're going to create a generic DOS console Java project. And for the project name, call this anything you want. I'm going to call mine a Create Pencil, because I'm going to run this Create Pencil example here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press Finished on the bottom. So I'm going to say Use Default Location. What does that mean? It's going to create the project in the workspace directory. When you first loaded up Eclipse, it asked you where you wanted to store all your projects. So each one of them is going to be in this location. You can change this location if you want, or you can use the default. I recommend using the default, putting everything together. That way you can always find the project and go back and look at it. So use an executable environment to JRE. Yes, because you're running, we're going to run it on your computer, and we're going to run in the JRE environment. If you click on the toggle over here, you see there's different versions of the JRE, which means it's backward compatible and forward compatible to different platforms. Leave it on 1.6 because it's going to pick the same version of JRE, which if yours says 1.7, don't worry about it. On my computer, I have the 1.6 installed, which I actually have 1.7 because we did it this morning on the Java, but I didn't do it on the Mac side, I did it on the Windows side, so it wasn't updated. So this might be different than mine. Also use the project specifically. Use a project-specific JRE. Don't worry about that. You're not creating your own JREs. We're going to use the built-in ones. And then on the bottom here, it says project layout. Create separate folders for source and class files. Yes, so we're going to see how that works in a few minutes. Or the other option is to use the project folder as the root for source for everything. We don't want to do that, because I'm going to show you something in a few minutes that's going to make your project organization look a little bit better. So go ahead and press Finished after all that. And you will have this little thing on the right-hand side of your screen. Get rid of this so you don't see this in the background. And it says mine says Create Pencil. If you click on the little arrow, it opens it up. And you don't see anything. You see a directory here that's empty. And it says SRS. So it stands for source. SRC, excuse me, it stands for source. In a hello world, you don't get anything, which is kind of ironic. Because if you run it, nothing happens. Can you please take your telephone call outside? It's distracting me. Oh, she's on the phone, so she can't hear me. Everybody else can look at her, though. I'm sorry, it's just distracting me. All right, and it's kind of, well, anyway. So over here we see the jar files. Remember I mentioned before we have jar files that are encapsulated. Well, they're not encapsulated. They're kind of compressed, a bunch of files all together. We look in here and we can see all of the different ones that are part of here. You don't want to mess with this. When you mess with this, you end up messing up your compiler. Never open up this GRE directory here and mess with that. Instead, you can go into the project and you can go into properties. You don't have to do this right now, but I'm just showing you how you would change those items. And you can come down here where it says Java source code style and compiler and editor, Java compiler, and you can basically come in here and change everything that's going to be included and not included. So sometimes when you get a third-party library that says, we need to install this jar file, you would use this screen with the instructions, hopefully given by the makers of the library, to add the library to the project, which is the better way of doing it. Some people like to come in here and start removing stuff. That's going to make it so your project doesn't compile correctly. All right, so for those of you who want to do the pencil and the create pencil, I'm going to start out with that one first. And so if you download, and I've been pointing this out in the morning, but I'll just do it one more time for the benefit of those people who haven't watched the morning video. In the bhacker.com directory, enter spring 2013, and it sounds like a broken record after a while, and object-oriented programming with Java. In the lecture examples folder, we're working with this file here. It's called sample1 classes. There's 3 of them. If you're in here, just download all 3 of them. You get 1, 2, and 3. Download those files. They're zip files. When you download them and you unzip them, I put them over here. So I have WJP sample 1, simple 1, simple 2, simple 3. I probably should make them all consistent. If you open up simple 1, you see lecture number 1's source code files. So you don't have to cut and paste from the PowerPoint, stick it in a Word file, or in a text file. It's already created for you. And there's 2 files in here we're going to work with. One's called pencil, and the other one's called create pencil. Those are the ones we've been looking at. But it's nice to see the code work, and then we can play around with the code and add some new variables and stuff to it. So what we're going to do is drag and drop these into the projects. And when you do that, it's going to ask you a couple of things. I always copy them in. Doesn't matter where you drag them and drop them into, as long as you put them in the SRS, which is the source code directory. The other option that I was trying to point out doesn't create this for you. Instead, you stick everything in here. But I'm the kind of person, okay, call me type A. I'm the kind of person that likes a source code directory, an icon directory, an images directory, script directory. I like to separate everything out because then when I look at the project, I can kind of see all the different pieces and put things together. This is kind of a simple project, not going to be too hard to lose this stuff, but this is how you do it. You drag it from pencil. Same instructions for Windows, and you let go. See the little plus I get here? You may not get the plus on a Windows system. And then let go of it, and it says copy or link. If you link it, it's going to use this as the source. Not such a good idea because there's a project created in the workspace directory that's going to have that in there. And then you can delete it out of the workspace directory and not have to use it anymore. So I'm going to select copy files, and then I'm going to go OK. And then now if I open up this directory, I see default package because I didn't specify a package. If I want to, I can take this a step further and create a package and put everything in the package, as I was talking about this morning, but let's not complicate things with packages right now. Let's just call it a default package. And in here, if I double-click on the file, it should open it up on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'm going to get rid of this console window right now. And I can see that this is the source code that is in the lecture. This is the pencil, all the way down to this static long that we were talking about. I was talking about before the class member. There's no comments in here. So, and this one has a couple more methods added to it. It has set color and get color in here. And I don't believe it's similar. It's very similar to the one in the lecture. I updated it a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. So do the same thing with create pencil. Go ahead and drag that in. But see, now this is all opened up. I'm just going to select here the source, drop it, and copy it again. So now I have 2. I have create pencil, which is my main driver program, and I have pencil. So this is going to be sort of your orientation to Eclipse as well right now. If you click on the tabs up here, and this confuses people as well, sometimes this will go away and sometimes this will go away. You can go into the, there used to be a window here, window directory. You can hide and show different windows. you can double click on stuff. Like for example, I just got rid of that console window on the bottom. If I run the program, it'll come back. And I don't see any error messages because this is all like nice and clean over here. If I introduce an error message, I'll just put some gobbledygook in there. So now I got an error message, and I see this as like this little red thing showed up over here. It says multiple markers at the same line. No problem. If I save it, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get this little red thing that shows up over here. And it actually, believe it or not, dates all the way backwards. It's not affecting this file. Pencil's still good. And pencil still shows up over here until I close the tab, by the way. So I can go back and forth between the different tabs, which is kind of like the reason why I like Eclipse. It's a little bit easier to edit in. But you see, I have this error that's causing this, and you can probably hopefully see this. What I'm trying to show you is this red stuff. Whenever you see red stuff, it means you have an error message. It doesn't mean you have one in here, and one in here. No, it means that there's something wrong. Go as far out as you can to the last red arrow, excuse me, the last red box. This is probably the offending code. So if I click on this offending file here, I can see, well, that's what the problem is. So I take that out, and then I notice, yeah, I removed the error, but the red things didn't go away. So I can come up here and save the file. I can close it here. I can save it using the menu options to save. Once I save it, it'll go ahead and update, like you see. If it doesn't update, there's a nice little feature in here to clean the project. So if you go into the project menu and say clean, and you say, well, which project do I want to clean? I want to clean this one here. It's already selected. I only have one project in here. Or, you know, clean projects selected below, or clean all projects. And just go OK. What does that do? It resets the memory. So Eclipse has some temporary memory that's used to cache stuff in there. Clean just resets it, puts it all back, so that if I fix the error but it just didn't update yet, and I haven't saved the file yet, I should go back through there and get rid of it and not show the error anymore, essentially. So sometimes that is introduced when you have a lot of memory being used by other programs. You have a big file, you have a big program. You save it, but it doesn't quite update instantly. Usually in systems with lack of memory, it might take a while. You see it more with the Android than you actually do with the Java. All right, so if I run the program, I go up to Project up here, and up to Run next to Project up here, and I can just select Run. If I select Run, it should run the program, and it opened it. Remember, I closed that console window and it opened it back up again. Now I have 1, 2, 2. Because I'm system out something here. What am I systeming out? Yeah, let me make this code a little easier to look at. And I'm going to put some spaces in here, because we're going to start writing source code now. Alright, so it printed out the results, which is going to be next ID, and then I incremented the ID, and I'm printing out the IDs, essentially. So let me take a look at the source code to see what this is doing. But first I want to kind of show you this little thing over here. It says this is not an error message, this is a warning message. And the warning message says the static method pencil.nextID should be accessed in a static way. Yeah, it should be. We're not really doing this right. We're not accessing this statically. Instead, we're accessing it through a method. And remember I said before, methods are run by instance methods, are run by instances that are created, and then class methods, status methods are run by class. So we should be going pencil.nextValue instead of p1.nextValue. We're not accessing this in the best way, but this is a primitive example. I mean, this is just an example. And we'll go back to the hello world and we'll write some code and see how it, not worrying about the static concept. But we got two interesting things here. And this is basically demonstrating this concept of this next ID. So what I'm going to do is kind of work backwards a little bit here. And go to pencil first. So if I click on pencil, I can click back and forth between the two. So I got create pencil, and these are the two files that are working with this project. So I can actually exit out. If I was in DOS, I can go to Windows File Manager, or I can go into the I believe it's going to be in My Documents, but let's just take a look here. Yes, in the My Documents, or the Documents folder of your Mac, if you're on a MacBook, you've selected the default location. I see Create Pencil in here. And Create Pencil is going to be in the Workspace directory. So, and then if I double click on here, what do I see? Well, I see the same stuff I see in Eclipse. There's my create pencil, and there's my pencil. And so if I look in the bin directory, that's that other one where I've got create pencil and pencil, create pencil and pencil class. This is my compiled version of the project. And I can see it out here actually as well in the bin directory that gets created, but it's not actually showing it to me here. Let's go like this first. Well, Android will show it to you. No, we're not going to see it. I bet there's a property setting to see it, but there's rarely a chance or rarely an opportunity where we'd want to use that outside of this. If you were to say, for example, you wanted to give me the project, you just click on the project and compress it as an example, and you give that to me. Or you give it to your friend, and then they can load it up into their Eclipse or something like that. You want to basically take the whole thing. If you're just looking for the source code files, then these are the source code files, same ones I gave you in a folder. And then if you're looking for the bins, on some systems, I don't know if mine's going to work. It should bring up a DOS. No, it's not going to do it. My class path is not configured on this computer properly, so it's not running anything from a command prompt, but this would open up a terminal window. Here it says Java class file cannot be launched. Yes, I know it can't. So it's going to give me a problem. If you have it set up correctly and you have your class path set, then you should be able to double click and run these files. However, you got to pick on the driver program. In this particular case, I'd have to run create pencil. But it's just as easy to run it in the GUI, and there's really no need to actually run it from a command prompt, except for when you distribute your program. When you distribute your program, you're most likely going to take all that stuff, put it into a jar file, and then your customer is going to run the jar file. Because why are you going to give them pencil and create pencil and eraser and pen and all those other files that you're going to put in there? It's a mess. What if they forget one of the files or something? You got a problem. So it's easier to just put it into a jar file, send it to them that way, which is how you get most of your libraries. You download, let's say, for example, the JDBC drivers, and it's a jar file. You just load it into your driver directory, and then you just use it. So let me go back to the pencil implementation. This is the same code we looked at in the lecture, so I'm going to kind of leave this alone. Except for we have two new methods, and these are easier methods than what we saw in the lecture. We have set color and get color. A set color is taking color and it's making it equal to my color. And get color is returning color. And what is color? Color is up here. In fact, I could make this actually extremely easy by going like this and getting rid of that. So if we want to make, if this project is too confusing for you, and I'm just kind of hacking away to show you certain things. I have, let's say, for example, you know, I can totally change this around completely by adding another variable to it, and I'm going to call this one num. I'm going to say integer num. And you see, well, what did I do? And I didn't get any error messages, but I got error messages while I typed it. That's one of the problems with Eclipse, because Eclipse said you're not done yet. You haven't put that semicolon in there yet. So it looks like it's wrong, which is terrible, because it's not showing you any feedback. But here I put integer number, and I left out private and protected and stuff. You can. In the beginning, if you wanted to, you could put up here public. Oops, if I spelt it correctly. You could put public class pencil. If you leave it out, it's assumed to be public. If you leave this out, it's assumed to be private. So I can put it in if I want to be explicit about it and go in here, public, and then change and put it in here, public. So in the beginning, if you want to, you can go ahead and use a public private. If you don't want to confuse yourself with it, you just leave it out. So I can go, you know, string. When I got color, I got integer number. You see now it looks all red. It looks like an error, but it really isn't because I just haven't finished the line yet. String, my string. Let's see, equals hello there. Or something, and put a semicolon at the end. Once I complete it, it should hopefully take away all the red stuff. If it's still red, it means there's something wrong with it. Like I made a typo or something. And notice I made that capital, and then I know that this is lowercase. So I highly recommend and I highly advise just add some stuff to it. You know, these are what's called data variables. And what we're doing is we're complementing, adding more data to this class. And so we have you know, float float f, let's say for example, double D. These are data types, integer I, string, character C, and I have a tendency to, keep going, F for float, D for double. Then I remember what data type it is, if I'm just playing around with it. So usually you always define data by taking and giving it a data type plus a name of the variable. Name can only be one character if you want. You can't start out a name with a number or a special character. But sometimes you see things and you can't be more than one word. So for example here, my string, it can't be like this. So the name of my variable can't be my space string, because then all of a sudden it'd be like, is that 2 or 1? So does not support the Windows long namespace. It basically, you have to have, I believe there's a cap of 7 or 11 characters or something of that nature. Maybe it's 7 characters. It's the old-fashioned FAT12 file system naming. So it dates back where it's coming from. Now in terms of spaces, you can go that way. Put the spaces in there if you want. Depends on what you want to do. You can also do this. You can also go string my string, and then go here my string is equal to, I'll change this because make it look better. And this is supposed to be a semicolon, not a colon. There we go. It's going to complain. What's it going to complain about? Let's see what it says. String token or expected. So what did I do here? My string, my string. Probably still using the wrong character. There we go. No, I don't know. I could probably clean it up and get rid of it, but I'll just put it back. Most likely, I think I'm using the wrong character. I'm using a colon instead of a semicolon there, and I keep correcting it. But again, that's a good example where it just didn't fix it. And then I can go clean it. That's an excellent example, actually. It should have worked. You can declare a variable like this. This is what I did here, right? And then you can, the next line underneath, you can go, f is equal to 12 or something like that nature if you want to. But, here's what the problem is, actually. You can't do that up here. So in procedural programming, I'm showing you a procedural programming technique, and I'm doing it inside of an object-oriented program. So in a procedural programming technique, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to define the variables up here, and then you're supposed to initialize them down here. And this is called an inline initialization. This is okay. But technically, you're not supposed to. Some compilers, actually, Objective-C allows you to do that, which is why originally I started doing that, because I'm teaching Objective-C on Monday night, so I'm in the habit of that right now. I have to switch back to Java. You can't do that. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to define those data variables, and then down here, you can have a public method as an example, or a constructor as an example. And we're going to call this set everything. And my void set everything method is going to set all my data for me. And if I put it as an example, an opening, I get a closing when I just press return on that. So Eclipse is going to try and automate stuff for you as an example here. And then you notice the error didn't go away. Oh, here's the error now. It took a few minutes. So it's not, and it's going to take a few minutes here. There we go. It goes away. So you have to be patient with it. So instead of everything, I can go up here. Let's say, for example, I did, I'll just leave this one alone. In here, I can say F is going to be equal to 12. And D is going to be equal to 10. And OC is going to be equal to A. And I've declared all my variables in here, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to use the methods, and these are public. In fact, I put the word public in. If I didn't put the word public in there, then it wouldn't. It would also, well, it would be public by default. But so then out in main, I can run an instance of this variable p1, and I can say set everything, and then I can print something out. And if I want to print something out, I can say, let's say, for example, here, we'll put one here. This just says get everything, but we'll have it print to the screen. And if you're not familiar with methods, this is the data type of the method, which means it's void, which means it's not returning anything. This is a string data type, and it's returning a string. So the data type of the method matches what you're going to return from the method. And if we're not going to return anything, make it void. So some people, when they learn C, they get this instructor that says, never use the word void for anything. Everything should have, including main, should be integer main and return 0. Not such the case with Objective-C. Now I'm thinking about Objective-C. Not such the case with Java or Objective-C or other object-oriented programming languages. If you're not returning anything, don't bother. Just make it void. So here I'm going to say get everything. And I'm just going to print it to the screen, actually. So here we have this get everything method. And when you think about it, out here in create pencil, we started printing stuff to the screen, and we use this method called system out. Oh, I think I got rid of next ID, which is why I have these error messages now. I'll fix that coming up. So the syntax here is system.out.println. So I'm going to show you I/O for a few minutes here. So let's say, for example, I want to print these 3 out because 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. I missed one. Double I-O-I. Let's just put I in here. I is equal to 1. That looks good. Now we have 4 of them in here. And I want to print all these 4 guys out. Well, then I can do a system out. And then I think, well, what was that she was telling me about system out? And I start typing the word system. And then Eclipse should hopefully prompt me with what I should be typing. As an example, I'm going to start out here with system dot. And it's not doing it. Oops, there it goes. It took a few minutes. System dot. There we go. So she say, well, what do you want? In, out. I want out. Dot. Well, what do I want to do? I can print, which is just going to print a character to the screen. Or I could print line, like what she was telling me before, and print line is going to print a string instead of just one character. Or maybe I want to print and I want to return to close at the end. Or what if I just want to close it? It's a file I/O, and I'm opening up a file and I want to close the print. Or let's say I just want to do this one. So I can sort of use this in the beginning and go, well, let's just do print here. And let me just print line. And I can see over here it says prints a string and then terminates the line. This method behaves as though it invokes print string and then print line. So I can read the little notes about it. You can turn that feature off if you want. If you press return, it actually inserts print line, and then it says, well, what do you want? You got choices. You got color, my string, get color. Well, because I'm printing a string. So here's the interesting thing. If I print a string, it wants a string. So if I don't get a string, I have to convert it to a string. So system out prints strings, but you can convert items to strings. So I'm going to just have this one go print color, and I'll put a semicolon at the end. For beginner programmers, what ended up happening here is that we can see we've got some color coding going on that I'm going to explain in a few minutes, but I put a semicolon at the end. So all of your lines of code have semicolons. All of your procedures have opening and closing brackets like this. Parameters end up in blue. And if you highlight, for example, you're like, where is this color? And I put it, a few seconds ago I went like this and I highlighted it with my mouse. And I noticed that color here is now highlighted and color down here is highlighted, and all instances of the word color are highlighted. Makes it nice because you're trying to figure out where is that integer I that I used. And so then if you touch, let's say for example here, C, no other, here's C right up here, but there's no other usages of C in here. So right now because we don't want to do any data conversion right now, let's just print out color. So this one here is going to be, get color. Well, return color. Well, let's just make this one get color instead of everything because it's really just returning color. Oops, I already have a color, and now it's going to complain. So constructors can have the same name, but methods, regular methods, I haven't talked about constructors yet, but methods don't normally. Instead, what you're going to get is this little error message that comes up here. It says, rename the method getColor. And if in this case, I know it's a duplicate, so if I press on there, now I got getColor1, because it tried to get rid of the duplicate. So those little messages are going to try and help you. But this isn't really one I wanted to do. Well, was it? Yeah, it's getColor1, but let's just call this one get my color instead. And you can call it getColor1 if you want, but it tried to get rid of the duplicate name. So now I've got a more customized class, and I've got methods, and methods are printing out or they're returning. And this is interesting because this is going to print it to the screen, and this is going to return something that I can print to the screen. Usually you're going to see it done this way. Because if you do it this way, it's not very flexible. What if you don't want to print it to the screen? So when you think about making classes and designing methods inside of your classes, be as generic as possible. I know, and make it as functional as possible, but as generic at the same time. So if I had my choice between these two methods here, this one and this one, I'd go with this one, actually, because this one's going to return color. And if it returns color, that means out here in the main program, I'm going to have to do system out dot get something. Well, I didn't do anything here. So in here, I'd have to do p1 dot get color if I wanted to do that. And get color doesn't exist, does it? Let's see. What's it called? Get color. Yes, it does. What's wrong with that? I don't know. Let's see what the message says. Message says create field get color. Oh, because I can't do it that way. And type pencil. Okay. Well, actually, I can just do this then if I wanted to. If that's the way it wants to be. Anyway, long story short, I'd have to run the method, and then the method would have to be inside of this method call right here. And then the method call, this system out, would substitute this method call with whatever it was, like print whatever. There we go. F works because it's a float, and it's going to print that to the screen. I'm not quite sure why color wasn't working. So let me get rid of this pencil.next. I'm getting rid of the static methods, the class one, because I just want to show you instance methods right now. And we'll change this one here. Let me just do a few modifications here for a second. Let me refresh my memory to see what other variables we have. Colors, a string, and it is public. Oh, you know what? It's lowercase. That's what the problem is. So if I come over here and I put in here, for example, lowercase color, then I should, yeah, there we go. I should print out the lowercase color. So what we're doing here is because everything is public, we are able, like here we have number, but I don't think I initialized number to anything. So down here I'm going to go number equals, let's go 13 on the number. There we go. And so once it does that, it highlights it in blue because it's a variable. It knows it recognizes it correctly. So this method here is called setEverything. So out here, I'm going to run number here because I'm going to do that. But in between, I'm going to run a p2.setEverything. There we go. So let me go through this code so you know, and this results here is not going to be the same. So let me get rid of these comments here because I've changed the code around. So I've made two instances, and let me do this here because this is a little bit easier as well. So out here in create pencil, I've made two instances of a pencil, P1 and P2. And this is how you make an instance. This is what I told you. You just have to memorize this. It's the same way. So if I have a pen, and I come out here and well, we'll do that next. So we'll create a pen, and we'll create a pen and a pencil all in one program. And then what I've done here then is kind of not really that kosher, but what I'm doing is I'm just printing out the data that's inside of P1, and here's P2. And I'm using a system command. And if I look at these little comments that are hard to see because they're kind of white, I don't know if you can see those. And you can't see them, kind of blurry on that screen up there. But you saw the little message that came out there. So static field pencil next ID. You look at that and you go, wow, what in the world does that mean? I'm not using next anymore. What is pencil.next ID? Where do you see that in there? You don't. That's where you come up here and you go clean. You shouldn't be seeing that. Now I'm going to have new messages instead. What are the new messages going to tell me? Static field next ID. And then when that happens, I come up here and I just say, well, just save it. Yeah. So you save it, and then you get, oh, okay, now I have new messages that are going to come out. And I say, well, what are the new messages going to say? This one's going to say, F cannot be resolved or is not a field. And then I come back here and I go, well, why isn't F a field in here? Probably because I didn't define it here as public. And it's not really part of it. Is it? Is it not? You know, and then I run into problems in terms of the troubleshooting. So I can come up here and say, all right, let's just make it public. Because remember, by default, everything is private. So I'm going to make it public. Now I've made it a field. So this is kind of like introduction to Java troubleshooting. Because then you have to go, well, what's a field? So then I'm going to save it. And all my messages went away. And I'm going to come back over here. And hopefully it'll work now. Because now I've made it public instead of private. So data is constantly private unless you make it public. Which is why you probably do want to get into the habit of going public. What did this say? Float F, public double D. Therefore, I'm not going to ever run into a problem. And here, if I wanted to use it, I probably should go public on here too. Yes?
You made public these data types, you made public. So, they will become public to the entire package. I mean, there will be some other code in this package. So, these public can be used in some other.
Correct.
So, it will be like public to the entire package.
Mm-hmm. And in here, I just changed it to private.
Okay, so now this will only for this.
So what ends up happening here is it's going to say the value of is not used. Well, of course it's not used. It can't be used outside of it. But now if I try to print out F over here, I get this little thing here. It says the field pencil one is not visible. It makes it invisible outside of the class because it's private. But inside of here, as an example, let's just leave it like this for a second here. And down here where it says set everything, I'm going to put, oh, we have F in here. So we have set F in here to 12. So although I can't use the dot, I can't use here, I can't use this because F isn't visible. I could, let's just put color here. I could come up here and say, well, P1 dot, what was it to set everything? Set, it's not filling it in for me. Everything. Okay, I was waiting for it to fill it in. Oops. I'm a terrible typist, by the way. Now I don't have an error message because I'm not accessing the F that I made private over here is not visible out into the main program. So instead what I'm doing is I'm changing it here through set everything, which is inside of the same scope. So it's inside of the class. So private means inside of the class, you can use it, you can do anything you want to it. I can go ahead and set it to F. And I can down here, I can write a method that says return F. So I can say, here, I'll put it under here. I like to put all my returns and stuff together. So if I could go public, make it public, integer, what was it? No, what was that? Float. Float. Get F and return F. And if I spelled return correctly, there we go. There we go. And then out here, I could say get F. Oops. Can I do that? It's going to return, I have to convert that actually. Actually, I have to do that, I believe. Did I call it? Yes, I did. There we go. That may not print. It depends. It should automatically be converted to a string. Or I can return, I'm returning a float. So theoretically, I should turn it into a string by going to string on it. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. Because here's the other problem you get when you first start writing your first programs is it's showing up as garbage on the screen. I don't know if it's going to or not, but we'll see in a few minutes. Sometimes it gets converted for you if it's compatible, sometimes it won't. And I'll show you another example in a few minutes. The hello world is a conversion for us, so we'll see that. So that everyone gets the idea, what I'm doing is I'm creating two instances and I'm running this method on P1 and I'm printing out P1.getF and I'm printing out P2.color because color is public. And then I'm running P2.setEverything, and I'm going to print out P1.number. And does P1.number get set? Yes, I did. So let's see what happens when we run it, actually. And here's another thing, too. So if you click on the project itself, and you right mouse click, you can also do a run as on it. And I'm going to run it as application, which is kind of the same. And then it's going to say, select the sources to save, because I haven't saved it yet. So it'll automatically save the project. Until I click this one down here, it says always save resources before launching. And then it's going to always do it for me. and I won't see this prompt anymore. And then I go, okay. Now I get some interesting things. I get 12 red and 13 printed to the screen. And if I follow through this, the value of get f was set to 12, and the color was red, and the number was set to 13. So this is a kind of a, a hello world for object-oriented sort of. It's a little bit more advanced than the hello world because it's doing system output.
Instead of print line, you would have chosen print. So what would have you?
So you can do this on your own, but you can go like this. Take out the print line and change it to print. She had to question, well, what would happen? It's all going to be on one line. Let's see. That's my guess. Run. All on one line. So the print line puts a line return at the end. Or you could just do a print line. Some people do this. I see this all the time for some reason. Let's just do a blank print line. And take this out. Which is going to put a blank line. So now when we run it, we have 1 after 12.0, because 12 points a float, actually. So although we had it equal to 12, it turned it into a float because it was a float value, F for float. And then, so you can mess around with that. In fact, this is where you start, actually, in terms of getting your feet wet. Yes?
Is there a possibility like you can change the original like we create an instance and we are thinking of the value, so should I just set the on the original class? Is there a possibility, or if there be such a requirement where we need to go and change the value of the original value?
You mean in here to go back through and edit something? That's where you would come up with a constructor. I'm going to talk about that next. But when you make this instance as an example, this is sort of the long way of doing something, but it's simple. Where we're just instantiating two P1 and P2, and we're not setting any values for any of that data. What we would normally do when we get a little bit more sophisticated is not do any of this stuff here. Instead, when we create the instance of the object, go ahead and instantiate the data at the same time. So you're going to set up parameters when you create the instance that's going to populate the float, the double, the integer, and the name. Actually, the name and the color and that stuff, all that stuff we have in there. And I have a separate example for that that's going to show you the constructors. But that's a way of automating it so that when you create these instances, you don't have to run all these methods, which is a lot more efficient. So, yes?
When you create a variable as a private,
Mm-hmm.
and you're actually not supposed to make the value of that private variable.
You can't. The compiler will complain if you try to.
Right. But what you actually just showed us is making a public method instance and using and returning the private values.
Yes, the public methods will retrieve and set the private values. In fact, if I wanted to correct this, let me get rid of this line of code. And this is a comment, by the way, the 2 lines. I believe, and this one here is also running a method. If I come back in through here, the ideal program should look like this. This should be private. Oops. Private. And then this one should be private. All of these things should say private, or leave it out. We don't have to put it in, we leave it out. If we make it private, if we make it public, it's not going to cause an error. If we make it private, that means we're making it non-visible to main. And then in here where it says set color, instead of just saying, okay, color is equal to my color, it doesn't really accomplish anything. There's no protective mechanism here. So instead, you can say, if my color is red, blue, or orange, and do a string comparison, then set the color. And then you've restricted the user to set the color to red, blue, or orange, which is different because you're adding rules in here and you're adding control over the setting of that. Classic example of this is if you had something to set a password. You had a box out there on the screen. You said, enter in a new password. You send it to the set password method. Without the set password method, you just say, okay, you know what? Password is equal to my new password. Ah, that's good, right? But what if it only is 1 character long or something? So in the set password method, you'd say, Does it contain a number? Is it more than 7 characters? Is it the last one you used? You know, it goes through all those little checks, and it makes sure that if you pass all the rules, then you're going to set the color. And I'm going to go through the if-thens and stuff because I know some people have never had that before, and I don't want to do that right now. But you'd set up some flow control, and you'd put some stuff in there. So you want to make it as functional and as strong as possible to basically make sure that you preserve the integrity of what you want to save for the class.
But
yeah?
isn't it a security breach where you're defining one variable as a private, setting up one value, and when you're defining a method as a public and returning a private value?
It is. It could be considered a security breach if you're not designing the method correctly. If you're just returning the value, why not just return the value? Why not just make the value public? I mean, if you're just setting the value. If you're returning it, that makes more sense. If you're going to allow it to return. See, sometimes, and this is the other thing come into place, well, methods are public. They don't have to be. It's a security breach if the class shouldn't be returning it. But let's say, for example, you want it to be used inside of the class and inside of the class only, and it's a method. A method inside of the class can call another method inside of the same class and not have it visible to the outside of the class. As an example for my set password method, could be calling another one that says, check the password. That's not available to the user. Well, I make that private. I say private void check password. And it goes through, or maybe not void, probably return like 0 or 1 or something to say whether it was successful or if it failed. And that method would be the algorithm, my secret algorithm or something that was used. But it's not available outside of the class. It's only available inside the class because it's private. And then it wouldn't be such of a security problem. In inherited classes, you call that method protected if you want it used in inherited classes, but you still don't want it used outside of that class. So that's why you have to kind of, when you talk about security breaches, it's kind of interesting phenomena. That's where you get the control is with that public, private, and protected. And it's up to the programmer to put that into place. As we've seen, we can make everything public. That might be a security problem. Because what if you made everything public and then you were able to change something and it didn't make any logical sense? As an example, you had a date class, as I was mentioning earlier, and someone set the day of the week as 40. No, the day of the month is 40. And then you tried to run another method, everything's going to break. If you're able to set the wrong value for a particular data member and you try to use that value in another method, you're going to have a broken program eventually because the integrity is going to be trashed because there's no such thing as day 40. It only goes up to 31 or something. So it's, it's there. It's kind of like security in general, however. Password security on a network is great, and you can turn off the password feature. Or you can make it so you don't ever have to update your password. That's great. You can violate your own rules in network security as well. So they say that Java, however, is a secure language not because of the public, private, and protected. It's because of policy files and policy security. Going back to, this is a slight tangent, but going back to the concept of the JVM, or the Java Virtual Machine, which is what JVM stands for, runs in a JRE. JRE is configured. Java Runtime Environment loads the JVM. JVM can have a bunch of support files. One of them is called a policy. There's policy files, there's security files, all sorts of different configuration files for the JVM. One of them might be can't open up text files, or can't write to files, or can't do this, can't do that. So you can make a Java program secure by tightening up the security in terms of what the program can do. Applets have that automatically. So if you write an applet and you run it from an internet website, you cannot violate this rule either. You can't override the policy. You're not allowed to open up any files. Why would that be a problem? Well, then you can easily write an applet that goes through the cache directory and loads up all the cookies and sends all the... You can easily create a virus that way. So, and if you're not familiar with the applet concept, not used very often, but it's a Java program written in the same code we're writing right now, but you inherit from applet instead of, from object that's inherent. But long story short, you can take any Java application, turn it into an applet, no problem, as long as you're following the right logic in terms of what's available, in terms of the resources. You compile it, turns into a .class file. You upload the .class file to your web server. The user downloads initially when it goes to HTTP protocol to your public HTML directory, downloads the HTML page. Inside of the HTML page, if it's calling a .class applet, it downloads that as well. Ends up in the temporary directories of your the user's web browser, and the applet runs on the user's computer just like these programs are running on your computers right now. So it's kind of interesting the way that that works. All done the same way, all done in the same syntax. When we write Android applications, same syntax, same coding. It's just it's running on an Android device instead of here in the console window. And if we load Swing, if we load AWT with it, then it loads in a GUI window, or it loads in our frame, and we have buttons we can click on and stuff like that. So all the concepts build on each other, so it's really nice to be able to take one language and apply it to all these different platforms, which is why Java is really popular, actually. Java is used as an underlying language for a lot of stuff, actually. Those are really good questions, and I highly encourage everyone to keep asking them because that helps me explain more stuff to you, especially stuff I may have left out. Any other questions on the pencil example? I think I've exhausted this a little bit. I don't know. Perhaps not. So what I would do if this is a very intense weekend, I'm going to push forward. But what I would do is kind of, save this if you've got it, save the project, and what you can do up here is, right mouse click and go close project, and then it's going to ask you if you want to save it and go yes. That way it doesn't open up automatically, it stays closed. Otherwise what ends up happening is you got like 5 or 6 different projects in here, and if you save them all separately, then you can go back in. And I'm going to actually kind of archive this because I can, someone says, where is that create pencil? I don't actually have it, I just created it. So here it is here. And let's say, for example, I don't have create pencil, and I want create pencil. And then what I'm going to do here is I closed X. You don't do this, but I'm going to show you something here. If you come over here to the documents directory, here we go, documents, and it's like, where did I put workspace? Here it is. I see create pencil. I'm going to move pencil out here. I moved it out of here. So it's no longer in my workspace directory. So workspace is empty. And I open up Eclipse. And if I've done that, Eclipse isn't going to reset. It should not. Hopefully it won't. It's not supposed to reset the project path. So what I'm going to do is show you how to import the entire project back in. Because what you're going to see is examples on the internet. You're going to go, how do you get that to open up? Xcode's really easy. There's a project file. You double click on the project file, it opens up, no problem. Why they didn't do this for Eclipse, I have no idea. But now if I try to open up Pencil, it's going to say, open Pencil has encountered a problem. Oh no, I've moved it. So now if I delete it, I'm going to just delete it here. It's going to give me this lovely little warning message. What you're doing is you're deleting out of Eclipse, and it's going to want to know, do you want to delete it out of the workspace directory too? Well, sure, why not? Delete the project because there's nothing in there. I moved it out. Workspace is empty. It's just got this random zip file that I put in here for some reason. Probably from some other program. But anyway, long story short, if I press delete project contents on the disk, cannot be undone. It cannot be undone, actually. If I select this option, and if it were still in this directory here, it'd be deleted, and it'd look like this right now. So now I'm back to square one, and I say, you know what, I couldn't get that create project to work. Can you get that to work for me? And I send you this file, and you unzip it, and you open this up, and you go, okay, well, how do I get this into Eclipse? I showed you how to put the source code file in, but do I really want to recreate a new project and drag this up in there? I don't have to. Instead, what I can do is come into here and come into the Eclipse menu, select File, go down to Import. And then I'm going to say Android existing. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say existing projects into Workspace. Why it comes up with Android all the time, I don't know. But next, and then I'm going to browse around here and I'm going to say, where did I put this thing? It's on the desktop. And it's called Create Pencil. I'm going to go, okay. And look at that, it found it and it put it in here and it's all checked and ready to go. And then there's an option here that says copy project into Workspace. And if I select that one and I go finish, lo and behold, I have the project back, and if I, oops, I thought I left workspace open. Let me go back in here for a second. It's back, and now it's in here, and this is a different copy than this one out here. If I want to link it, no problem, but it's not going to be, if I don't copy it and I just link directly, then I'm going to have projects all over my disk everywhere. And I'm not going to be able to organize it very well. Plus, if I'm using this as the original and I want to modify it, I want to maybe sometimes keep the original and go back to it just in case it stops working and go, what did I change? What happened with this? And then I have the modified version in here. So, unfortunately, that's how you have to get projects, and it works for Android the same way, actually. So what I'm going to do now is look at one more. I'm going to keep this one in here actually, and instead I'm going to load up the Hello World example. Okay, kind of show you that as well, because we looked at Hello World as well. So this one was called. Actually, there's two. There's Hello World and there's Hello. Let me just take a quick peek here at this one here. Which one do I want to open? This one's trivial. This one's not going to do anything. Let's drag a hello into the project. Or you can create a new project if you want. Copy it in. Here's hello. We're going to have an issue with hello. I'm going to leave this in here for a second to show you something to demonstrate a problem. So we had a driver program, and it was called Create Pencil, and I double-clicked on it. And it has a main method in here, and this is why it's called the driver program. So essentially now I have two driver programs added into the same project. So I'm going to get an error message when I don't see any error messages here at all, except for I do see this little thing that says there's a suggestion, there's an issue going on in here. And if I click on it, I look at it and I go, well, where is it? Oops, there's nothing in here. So it usually means it's a project configuration problem. Unfortunately, they made these as small as possible, so most people, including myself, often overlook it. And I go, oh, what's wrong with that? I don't know. What's wrong with that? I don't know. I say, well, actually, what's wrong with Pencil? I'm opening up the wrong one. Pencil has an issue. Let's see. Oh, it has an issue because I've never used it. A value is not used. Okay. See, I thought it was going to be smart enough to recognize the multiple mains. So now if I run the program, I have a problem because I have multiple mains. So if I run it, it's going to come back and it runs, which is interesting. 12. What happened with 12? Why did it print 12 to the screen? Let's go back into hello. What is hello doing? Well, in the old version, it used to give an error message because you got multiple mains. Theoretically, actually, this main is going to fail. This is why it works. Let me make this so it doesn't fail. This one's going to fail because this one takes on command line arguments, 2 command line arguments, and then if it doesn't work, it returns. So I'm going to modify this to take out the command line arguments. What do I mean by command line arguments? Let me show you something else. If you've never had a programming course before, you don't know about arrays. But this is a string array, and I'm going to go through arrays soon, actually, if I hit it, or maybe tomorrow morning, we'll see what happens. It's a data type that holds on multiple. So you can have an array of strings, an array of integers. So this is a single, like integer I is a single data type, holds one value for I. It can have I5 as an example, and you put in opening and closing brackets, and you can store 5 integers now instead of 1. So arrays just allow you to hold multiples. So the string array is going to have multiple string, and we're calling it arguments, and arguments comes in from the command line arguments. And this dates back to C. So if you've ever taken a C course and you've worked with command line arguments, like in systems programming or something, it's the same concept, but it works in Java the same way. So we can take in any number of arguments, parse the arguments in the array, and then use that in the program. And so here we're setting the string, because when we run this program, and in Eclipse it's not going to prompt us for any information. Instead it's going to, I know how to get this to work. Right mouse click on it and run it. I bet that's, now, oh yeah, there it goes, usage. So, all right, well that's what they did. I just had a thought. Like, I bet they switched it. I've seen in the old days, if you had multiple drivers in there, it'd complain and ask you, which one do you want to use? now if you click on the driver itself and run it, it'll run the right one, which is what I just did. So anyway, long story short, here there's the usage hello name age is going to print to the screen because it's going to get caught right here because I didn't take on any command line arguments because this program was designed to run from the command line. So this program, however, does something really interesting. It's going to, let's say for example, run a method here though on one of the arguments because this is a string array. It's converting the string here to parse integer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about data types for a second for those people who don't have a background in programming. In almost every language, C, C++, Java, Objective-C, you can't mix and match data types. So if you want to add two numbers together, they have to be the same type. So if you have an integer and an integer add together, fine. An integer and a float don't add together, fine. So in Java, there's a really quick and easy way of fixing that problem. You just parse to something, parse float, parse integer, and you run this. And because all of these methods are object references, you run them like objects. So we have integer dot parse int, and then we have something in here. Well, this could be a string. This could be, you know, like hello, but that's not going to parse correctly. So if we just did here and we put 1, that might parse correctly. But what we're doing is we're taking a string and we're making it into an integer. And when we do this, and then we're adding it to integer age, and integer age is an integer. This hello world is not object oriented because it never creates any instances of any objects. Yes? Parse. Parse is an old word used to read in and convert. So when we parse something, for example, if you've ever used one of those language translators, and it says on the left-hand side, type in your English words, and you click a button and it changes it to French or Spanish or something for you. It parsed it. It took it and read it in word by word, and then it went through an algorithm and it converted. It said the, and over here it said le, you know, and it went back and forth between the words and the translation. So it parsed it. So what this is going to do is it's going to read this and go, read this word. Well, the word's 1. So parse it now to an integer value. Integer value is going to be 1, which changes its data type, which in like the Spanish to French, it's going to change the translation of the meaning of the word into a different representation. Because here's something about data types for brand new people, because I get people who have just come from different fields. So this is why I say hopefully you won't get too bored with me, but integer I, float f, string something, string s. These are all taking up different amounts of memory. They have bytes associated with them that are all calculations for the amount. So a data type itself, as an example, integer, has a range of acceptable values. So it goes from, oh, don't quote me on this one, but 65,000 something to negative 65,000 something. Well, actually, I'd start with the negative if I was reading this correctly. It passes the 0, so we have a string. We have a whole field of negative and a whole field of positive and a whole field of biggest value we could possibly store in there. Because this representation of I is the identifier or the label. And if I had a board, I'd draw a little box and I'd put a memory address next to it and then say I is equal to that memory address, because that's what really I is representing. But the address is only the size of an integer. That's pretty small. So then people go, well, we have two different types of integers. We have short and then we have long. Well, short is narrower length. Long is the full length. Integers fudge it a little bit. You can have an integer value that doesn't quite fit correctly, that might get too big, and then if that were the case, you go long with it. It depends on how much space you're going to store. So if you say, give me a long, and you go long L and short SS, because I already used S as an example here. This one's going to give me the full integer values. This one's going to give me just the minimal. So it doesn't use as much memory. So when people use Java, actually Java started out as a language for printers. It was a printer operating system, believe it or not, and then it ends up on BlackBerry phones, and then now it's on Android phones and stuff. Well, on a computer, I got 8 gigs of RAM. I don't know how much you got, but anyway, you have a lot of RAM. You have more than a megabyte. On some embedded devices that use Java as their operating system or as a programming, just like C, you got to go short, unsigned, which means don't keep the signed information, which means you're saving as little bit of piece of memory as possible because you're going to run out of memory. We're not going to run out of memory on this computer, which is why everyone goes integer these days. But if you're programming in an embedded systems environment or something, you can adjust how much memory you're reserving by the type of variable that you're using. So I mentioned signed and unsigned. This is signed. Unless you put unsigned next to it, it's always signed. What does signed mean? It's going to keep track of the positive and the negative. So it's going to know whether it's a negative or positive number. It's not going to keep track of that information if you go unsigned. It means just, I'm going to keep track of it. You don't have to keep track of it. And then the memory is just going to store whatever it needs to store to keep track of that.
So there is a keyword unsigned?
There is a keyword unsigned. Unsigned is, it's not going to, I don't know if I did this correctly in here, but anyway, unsigned is not going to work in here. It's mostly used, you're not going to use it in Java either, because Java's got automatic garbage collection. I'm going to explain in a few minutes, because now I have to. In C, you're going to go unsigned. And if you're working in, let's say, a small little thing that's got, one megabyte of RAM on it or something, to make it smaller, especially when you're never going to have negative numbers or positive, everything's going to always be positive, or everything's always going to be negative, then you don't have to worry if it's negative or positive. So you add it to the data type, just like you add static. So if I say static integer, or unsigned integer, my typing is really bad, and my syntax is bad, but you add it along with the other stuff that you're doing when you define the variable to make it more specific in terms of what it is you're defining. In Java, I don't know if, I can't remember actually off the top of my head if we have signed or unsigned. I believe it is still supported, but there's no need to do it. It's just the same ways. There's really no need to do long and shorts anymore either, because we have this thing called garbage collection. Okay, so if we allocate, and as I mentioned before, there's no delete, which means we can say new. It just reserves memory. Well, eventually we're going to run out of memory. So it's kind of like garbage collectors are sort of like garbage collectors in the real world. You take all your trash from the house, you put them in a can, you stick it out on the curb. The next morning you come in and you pick up the empty cans and it's all gone. Well, that's what the Java garbage collector does. It goes through your program and says, you haven't used I in ages, you should throw that away. When are you going to use that? I'm going to use that. Okay, so you throw it away. It forces you to throw stuff away. It's like the guy that comes over your house, or clean. It's like your cleaning service if you have cleaning service, or anyway, somebody comes over your house and says, can I have this? Can I have that? Can I have this? It takes away all the stuff you haven't used in a long time. If you're going to use it, well, then I can always put it back. If you want to ask me, I'll give it back to you. Okay. But in the meantime, you're not using it. Can I take it? You're not using it. I want to use it. I want to get rid of it. And it frees up the memory for you, because it takes stuff out of memory that you're not using. And then it makes more room for more memory, which is the oddest concept, because up until dynamic programming and garbage collectors, people allocated and they deallocated. Like in C++, if you go new and you create a new object, if you do new enough, eventually you're going to run out of room and you can't create any new objects, and you're going to add a memory error. Wow. So you have to go delete to make room, because that's called a memory leak. Memory leak happens when you allocate too much and you don't deallocate, and then eventually you run out of available spaces. Can you guys keep it down a little bit? Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to talk over you. Thank you. And I have a microphone. So, all right, another distraction. But anyway, back to, I'm undistracted now. So if you can allocate, never have to deallocate, means somebody else is doing it for you. The JVM is called a sweeping algorithm. It just goes through each one of the memory locations and says, are you being used? No, you haven't used you in a while. Okay, we'll clean you up. And then it keeps a reference of what's being used and what's not being used, which is called reference counting, which is what Objective-C does. So Objective-C has a similar mechanism, It's called automatic reference counting, if you're familiar with that. You just select the object, and it does your garbage collection for you. So it's kind of semi-automatic. Java is completely automatic. So Java, there's no... In Objective-C, you can selectively retain things. Why do you want to do that? Well, it actually speeds up your performance. So one of the reasons why people say Java runs a little bit slower, it kind of does, actually. It constantly garbage collects, and then you have to put it back. Because if you call I and I got removed, it's going to go, where's I? You want to print I now? Oh no. I have to go back, find it, put it back in there, and then print it out slower. Much slower than if I was already there. And if you retained it in Objective-C, then it's there. You're never going to have to switch back and forth and load it. So anyway. Yeah, it just takes out the reference, and it keeps a temp copy of it, kind of so it can put it back if it needs to. Because imagine if it just went and removed everything, how many mistakes it would make. So instead of making mistakes, it just kind of keeps a list of it. It's called a reference list. And then it sweeps through and checks the list and says, not using it, not using it, not using it. Take it out, take it out, take it out. So it frees up the memory. Now, it doesn't mean you can't run on not as much memory. However, you can get the same program in Java to work with really good results on a small little Android device. I don't know how much memory I have on here, but it's not much. And then compared to a big old computer, runs about the same performance. This does a little bit more garbage collecting. It has to. Than this one does. So pros and cons, but it makes it work. It makes it more cross-platform compatible when it can selectively manage its own memory as well. You can also configure the Java JVM for different memory prints. You can actually give it more memory or less memory, especially if you're running other things on the computer and you want it to be more efficient or something. If you haven't noticed, Java programs actually run a little bit slower. So a lot of people like to use NetBeans in the past. People who've learned Java download and install this program called NetBeans. Don't recommend it because it's written in Java and it runs like a Java program. It's slow. So it takes a while for it to load up, and it's constantly doing garbage collection, but NetBeans will run on anything. So you have pros and cons. So, all right, so back to Hello World. Hello World here is taking on two arguments, and the arguments it's printing out a usage if the arguments aren't met, and then it's doing a system exit one. So system, I brought this example up to kind of talk a little bit more about system as well. System out, we also have system in. So we can have system.in, which is its partner to that. And then it's going to say, well, in stream, and then go, well, what do we want a system in? Read. We can read a character in. We can read a line in. And I'll talk about that in another lecture. But system is going to be our basic I/O system. So it's our DOS console, and it's our Windows I know it's mostly DOS console. But it's a kind of a window into the window for abstract window. We don't have that in Android, and before the day is over with, I'm going to show you an Android project as well so we can compare the differences. But think of it more like the I/O system. So system.exit means close the I/O, close the program down. System is like the system, like the runtime environment. So in C++ we go exit. So in Java we go system.exit. It's the same thing. In fact, you'll notice in Java the same. If you are familiar at all with C, a lot of the methods calls are the same, but except for them being function calls, they're method calls. So in C++ or C, it would be a function call that said exit. Actually, this works. Well, it'll take a few minutes before it comes in with an error message because this is a syntax error too. In Java, we go system.exit, and then this is just the return that we're exiting. We're going to exit one out of this. So, and then we close the parameter. So I'm going to take this away, actually, and remove it. And take this away and remove it, and show you something else that's in here. This is the interesting part here. So here, I'm just going to take this and make this equal to Barbara. There we go. And so now I have a string. And I want to show you this program here. This is not an object-oriented program, but it looks like one. We didn't create any objects. We didn't use any objects. We just have hello. If anything, the program itself is an object. but we're not really taking advantages of instances of objects or anything. We're treating this like a C program. So a lot of people in C++ do this, or a lot of people in Java do this, and they think they're making object-oriented programs, and they're not. They're just putting it all in main, and then it's just like running a C program and putting it all in main. So now you guys know the differences between object orientation and procedural programming, I hope. Did you have a question? Mm-hmm. No, that was just for the command line stuff. I'm changing the program. I'm just going to change the example because I already talked about that stuff. That you need if you want to print something to the screen. This is going to print something to the screen too. But I wanted to show you kind of how to mix and match variables and stuff along with strings. And another thing here is this word wrapping I'm going to show you. Yeah?
So, the stuff you actually did there, you were referencing a length of...
Let me put it back real quick. So if I come up here and I do undo typing, actually I could probably press what is it, Z, Command Z on my keyboard. Here, let's do it that way. Command Z. Oops. Here we go. This is the stuff I deleted.
Yes. So you're referencing ARGS.length.
Mm-hmm.
So what exactly is checking? It's an ARGS, it's a string variable which has some value, and it's checking the length of that.
Correct. It's running a length method, but it's actually not running a method, it's returning the variable. So here's a trick. In fact, I'm going to hold your thought for a second. Whenever you see this on the end of it, there's actually two of them. There's length with opening and closing empty brackets, which is going to return length from the method. Okay, just forget the syntax here for a second because I'm not assigning it to anything. Whenever you see it without this, this is returning a data variable. This opening and closing empty bracket is returning a method call. It's going to run a method that's going to return probably the length in this case. I believe this one has a capital L on it, but let's see. I don't know. Anyway, long story short, don't worry about my syntax, but I was trying to demonstrate the difference between the opening and closing at the end. So immediately I take a look at this here and I said something incorrect. By default, I probably should run a method to return the length, but I'm not. I'm actually returning, I'm checking this because I'm doing a comparison at it. It's not equal to 2. And the length is going to come back, argument's length is going to come back with 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever this value of length is. Because inside of the implementation of string, I have a piece of data that's probably called integer length. And all I'm doing is the same thing with pencil, with color, and with the numbers and all that other stuff. I'm just returning that data value. So what was your question?
Yeah, now there is another question when you explain the method call. So I was actually expecting it is a method call. But
Yeah, it's not a method call. Yeah.
So does it mean that length is a variable? It's not a method, since we don't have parentheses?
Yeah, because it's a public data member of the string class, which is why we're allowed to do this. It's made public because people don't want to. Why run a method if you're just going to return the length?
So it is actually going to return the length of args variable.
Mm-hmm. And args in this case depends on how many things you put on the command line that comes through the string. Don't worry about command lines. You're never going to use it. You're never going to use it. Yeah.
I would like to know why you put 1 after the system.access.
Oh, because this method requires a parameter, and if I don't give it a parameter, the method's not going to work. It's going to complain. In fact, it is going to say, add argument to match exit int, because in the definition of this method call, it wants, and that's kind of big, so that's kind of small, so I'll write it here. When this method was defined, it was defined like this, which goes back to function programming or method programming. When you create, we still have this here. I'll open up pencil. So this method here called setColor, if it's expecting one parameter and it's expecting a string called myColor. So if I run this method and I don't send it a color, it's going to give me an error message. Exit is actually written the same way. It wants a number, an integer number. So you can return the number back and say exit 0, which means it was successful, or exit anything else, which means it failed. It doesn't have to be the number 1. In fact, exit takes anything. This goes back to returns, the concept of return. So when you return something from a function that is going to be for error checking, like exit is actually, the integer is used to say, did it exit normally? Did it exit abnormally? Was there a problem? It's kind of like when you open up files, you do a try and a catch. And you go, try, open this file, and have it equal to this integer variable. Because that file opening method is going to return something. It's going to return an integer value 0 and it was successful. Or I think it's actually the opposite. 1 is successful, 0 is unsuccessful. So you check to see if it's 0, then try it again. Try it again. Or tell the user, hey, there's something wrong with your file. And then file can't be opened, or file doesn't exist, or something. So it's checking the status of the method call here to make sure, for example, if I put in exit 8,888, well, that's a proper integer value and it will work just fine. But where does it go to? The runtime environment? If I had another program out there that said, hey, what was that exit status from that other program? Oh, it was 88888, then, oh, well, what do I do with that? Oh, that means it was unsuccessful or something. You can use it for troubleshooting. It's for error detection, stuff like that. But, in the set password sample method I was talking about, if the user enters in, for example, something that was illegal, the same password they used the last time, the exit status would come back and say, -1. And then out there in main, it would say that it came back -1. Okay, enter another password in there. I don't like your password. Sometimes it'll tell you, well, what was wrong with the password, given the exit code. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something. And depending upon what number comes back, it can switch it around and say, if it's 1, then you entered too many characters, or not enough characters. If it's 2, you duplicated your password. If it's 3, so it makes it, for error checking, comes in very handy. They call that the return value of a function. And you use that actually in Linux, Unix a lot. Java, you're never going to use it for anything. Well, you might. Android, you might use it for something. You're building an Android app and it says, go out there and look up this person's email address in the contact list, and the person doesn't exist. What are you going to assume, that it was successful? And then you're calling a number that doesn't exist, or sending a message to something that doesn't exist, so you can use it to say, hey, person's not in your contact list. Enter another name or something. So you could use it for user, to improve the UI. Okay, are we any no more questions on this one, or I'm going to go back and delete it. I know there's probably a redo. All right, so I hear I'm going to change this string to something, and I can leave this up here alone, which is kind of interesting. So sometimes you see, in fact, let's take a look over here to create pencil. Create pencil has it too. So sometimes when you create a default project, it'll put the string arguments in here. I believe Eclipse in Java requires it. C, you can do that with it and not have to take on any parameters at all. Just looks like that. So I'll just leave that one. We'll see if it complains eventually. So if I go back to hello, I can set this to Barbara as an example. And then an integer age, and I can see, I'm going to put here 100 because I'm 100 years old. And I can see here I have parsed this one here because I've used integer.parseInt100. So now I've taken this and turned it into an integer. I can also do this, float f is equal to float. No, let's not do that. Anyway, each one of you can parse float, parse integer, parse double, parse string, where you can take a number and turn it into a string. Or if you put a number in the string, it will print out a string. It'll print it out as a string, but it'll do its own conversion. So mostly you're going to see the parse int, parse double, parse float, because as an example, if I did this and I went .00, or maybe this was 50, and 100 and a half, then it's going to round it up to an integer. And actually, it's not. If I parse it, it's going to take in just the integer value is going to come out of that. Actually, I'll just leave that alone to see what happens. But so here's another thing that I forgot to mention that I kind of wanted to. So you see that this is kind of indented, kind of funny. There's no spaces, there's no there's no tabs or anything, but we're using plus here to add it together, but we're also putting it on multiple lines. So although Java is case sensitive, it's not line sensitive. So there's people that get into the habit of indenting and people that get into the habit of word wrapping and stuff because, you know, what if this was a really huge, and you'll see this in Android actually, really huge line of code that spans multiple lines and it's really difficult to read. Well, you don't have to, like in other languages, you have to put special characters at the end of the sentence and stuff. Here you can just word wrap it. Word wrap it. You just put a line return in here and then, you know, essentially what you've done is continued the code on a multiple line. Until it hits the semicolon, it's not going to have a problem with that. Other languages and other language environments might have a problem with that, unless you put special characters on there. So what I've done here is to show you concatenation as another example. So we have hello, which is a string, plus name, which is up here, which is a string. You are here, separated by another string, plus, and we're using the plus to add them together in a concatenation sense. So built-in data has a set of allowable values that are associated to it. Well, it also has a set of allowable operations. And so if I took two integers and I added them together, and one integer was 1 and the other one was 1, I'm going to get 2 out of it. If those weren't integer types and they were string or they were float types, I'm going to get 11 out of that. Or here I'm going to get concatenation out of that, which is the same thing. So if I run this little program here, I should get a message that says error message, Java thread, format incompatible, 10.5, because I didn't give it an integer to parse, I gave it a float to parse. So I'll change it. I was just kind of curious to see if I was going to get that message, or if it would just blindly convert it. So if I wanted to do that, I'd have to parse the float to an integer and then parse the integer to a string, or take the string, parse it to an integer after parsing it. So now if I run it, I should get, hopefully, hello Barbara, you are 100 years old, printed to the screen. So it's kind of like hello world number 2, actually. Yes?
Can you explain again the significance of an integer dot parse and integer?
The significance of this is...
If we would have directly written int id is equal to 100, then in that case also it would have not, right?
Correct. If I went like this, she's bringing up a good point. My age. And I say equals to 10. Now I'm only 10 years old, and I go down here and I change age to my age. This integer will be converted to a string when concatenated. The concatenation is doing it for us. Actually, let me spell it correctly. My age.
The m is small.
Well, small m. My age. Oh, there you go. This should work. Yes, 10 years old now. Because this concatenation is converting it. So it's interesting. This was, and she brings up a good, this is unnecessary, actually. However, in some cases when you're not doing this and you want to pass age to a function and the function's expecting an integer, you can't pass it a string. It's going to only expect an integer. Yes? Pass a decimal point number by passing, well, let's go back to pencil here. Are you talking about like in here where it says string my color to put in here? Let's say, for example, double or float decimal precision. So it would look like, let me just write it for you. You basically would just pass it the number itself without any quotation marks or anything. So if I did this here, let's see, what do I have up here? I have F. So let's take this one and call this one set. Change this one here. Float mine F. And this one's going to be set F. And this is going to be F is going to be equal to my F. So I'm going to pass it a float, which is going to be precision. It's going to be decimal points. So decimal points are floats and doubles. So if I go over here to create pencil, and what was that thing called? I said F. If I come down here and I come over here and I want to just go P2 dot set F, which is this guy right here. It's expecting a float. I don't know if you can see that little window. It says float my F. It's expecting a float, so I have to put a float value in here. You could actually just put 0 and it gets rounded to a float. Or I can go 0.50 or something. I can also convert it to a float by using F. Oh, yeah, there it goes, which means convert it to a float. In fact, in this particular case, because it was 0, it was rounding it, so. This will come in handy when you start doing the first assignment, actually, Fahrenheit to Celsius, I think, or no, what are we doing? Temperature conversions, I think, which we might be starting tomorrow. Looking at my clock, we'll see what happens. So tomorrow we're going to write the first program, which is doing temperature conversions. So you have to take one temperature and convert it to another temperature, but when you're dividing things, it's all about variables. It's all about this concept, and we start writing the sample code for it, and what ends up happening is we start looking at it, and we go, well, we have to have apples and apples in order for it to work. So then we can use this stuff here, the F as an example, to say, treat it like a float. So if I did here, if I went system.out.print, oops, let me stick this guy in here. There we go. print. What's wrong with that? Print. Yeah, I know. I had to change it to a string. You're right. All right, it wants a string. You're right. Actually, if I click on here, it's going to say remove argument to match print line. Or if I hover over, I get the same effect. I forgot to tell you. So if you hover over, this is a good example. Actually, it's expecting a string, and I'm giving it something that's returning a float. So if I hover my mouse over, it's going to say remove the argument to match print line, or change to print something, or change the return type of setF to Boolean. So I changed the back over here, and now this is going to have a problem because it's returning, it's Boolean, which is going to be returning true or false in terms of did it succeed or did it not succeed in terms of that. But it's wrong logic, so it made me do the wrong error. So unfortunately, what ends up happening is you start typing the stuff in, you'll start taking these suggestions, and some of them just don't make any logical sense, like this one doesn't. So, but you know what? I could take that and convert that, parse the float to a string, and then I could print it. Yes? Probably would. Is that what you're thinking? No. Actually, it would work this way. Oh, I removed the... Hold on, I removed the accidentally. Let me put this back. You're probably right. Actually, let me just undo this one too. Undo, change return type. Okay, we're good here. In the create pencil, what your suggestion was is to remove this F here. And we're going to have the same issue, but when we put my mouse over here, it's going to say the method in the type pencil is not applicable to the arguments double. See, the F typecast it to a float from a double. So if I change the argument to a double, it would actually work. A double and a float are not the same variable type. If I go here, double. I'm sorry? No, I'm just setting F is equal to something. And you're right, your return type is void, which means the function itself, if I can print it out, it's not going to print anything out. Which is a logic problem right there in itself. So, and then this is when you figure out, oh, why did I do that? I don't know why I did that, actually. I just kind of did it because, just for an example of how to run it. But really what I want to do is change this. So if I was going to really troubleshoot this problem, I'd go back to pencil and just change this here to return double. Well, actually, I could return float at this point. And float up here is a float, so I can change float here to a double. Actually, I could just leave it on float and it would work as well. So, but I already have half the code written. So now float is a double, and what do we have here? It's not returning anything, you're right. So here I can go return. See, some of you guys already know this stuff. Return F, how's that? And then now if we come back up here and we look at this, and now it should work. So we run it. So, whoops. Always launch without asking. Proceed. Errors exist. Oh, no. I'm probably, oh. Well. Where's the error in pencil? Did I have another typo in here? I probably used F as a float. I did right here. So, you know what? We just get rid of this function. There we go. Now we run it. Here's the funny thing. So you see that little message that came up that said, well, I don't think I was printing anything, was I? Anyway, long story short, it's running the last compiled version of it because it couldn't compile it because there was an error message in it. So the logic of that, of me answering, okay, yeah, continue anyway with the error, I think is senseless. Other compilers, other environments would say, hey, there's an error, it won't compile, instead of using the last compiled version of it, which is kind of deceiving if you think about it, which is what that did. Because this is still the last compiled version of it. I still have something wrong with it. Because I'm not printing out here, this is here, oh yeah, this has got a problem, so it didn't run it. All right, so we get rid of that, because remember I removed that getF method. So now if I run it, let's see if it works now. Nope, still doesn't work. Anyway, long story short, there's probably another problem in here. Or could probably clean it up. But anyway, hopefully that demonstrated the point that I was trying to make, was that you would have to it returns something. So instead of the function being void, if you change the return type, so it actually returns something. If you put that inside of the system print, if I go back to hello world, which is what I was originally doing here, I don't actually have to take this and parse this to an integer to put an integer in here. I can just create an integer to do it. But if I did this, I'd have a problem. If I did integer age, let's say, for example, and it equaled name. I already have age. Okay, integer age with a capital A, and it equaled name, and name's a string, I'd have a problem with that. And let's say name was still, let's say the name was still 1, as an example here. And I said, oh, then it's going to tell me if I go over here and I said type mismatch, cannot convert a string to an integer. And I put my mouse over here and I say, well, what can I do? Well, change the type of age to string, change the type of name to integer. Well, if I do that, then I've changed it up here, but what if I, and then I'm thinking, well, that's the wrong way of troubleshooting it. So hey, keep in mind, the suggestions don't always make sense, because in this particular case, what I'd want to do is this here. But instead of putting this quotation mark in here, I put the word name in here. So this would be name. So now I've changed this string to an integer, and now it's name. So this is what you're going to see more often versus a real string in there. Because people are going to have a string, and you're going to take the string in from the command line argument as an example, and you're going to say, I want the age to be equal to the string. Well, you're going to get an error message. Even though the string is holding a number, you have to mismatch. You'll have a type mismatch. So you have to convert the types to the correct type so you can add them together and use them interchangeably.
But is it always convertible? Like, since one is a numeric value,
yeah.
and you can convert and put it into
Very good example. Here, let's say this one was Barbara. Let's just misspell Barbara too, and I run it. Well, now I got a message here. It says string Barbara, the numerical format exception for input string. Well, it's not really a string, so when it tried to parse it, it had a problem. If you take a big number and stuff it into a small space, you're going to lose precision. If you take a string that's really a string and not a number, and you try to convert it to a number, there might be no number conversion for it. Like Barbara doesn't really equate to any number that I know of. Sometimes with characters, you can get an ASCII character equal to a numeric integer, but it's going to be the ASCII numeric integer equivalence to it, or it's going to be alphanumeric, depending upon what character set you're using, and you're not going to get a direct numbering translation. So they call this typecasting, by the way. You're taking a type and you're casting it to another type. There's also object reference typing. So typecasting in general is very risky because we don't know if we take a double and convert it to an integer, we're going to lose some precision on that. We don't know exactly what's going to happen because we're taking a big number and stuffing it into a small space. Or in this particular case, we don't know. But if we object cast, so we upcast an object, we take something and we move it up in the hierarchy, that's a good thing. Because what we can do is, for example, because we know that we have to have only like types together, we can have an array of pencils and put all these pencils inside of this array. And then some of the pencils might be highlighters, and some of them might be other objects that are further up in the hierarchy. And we can cast all those objects down to the same type, put all the same object type into an array of that object type, and then we've solved the problem. So we do casting to make things equal, and so it makes sense with objects and object references, because we have an is-a relationship with objects, which we're going to get to eventually, probably tomorrow, but everything is an object. And if we create an object of type pencil, and then we create another object of highlighter that's from type pencil, and we take another object and we call it super highlighter that's also from pencil, we can take all three of those guys and make them into pencils because they all have that in common, because every one of the highlighters is also a pencil. And then the super highlighter is also, maybe it's a highlighter and a pencil, who knows. But we can cast up and down through the hierarchy and make them all the same data type, put them all in the same structure like an array, and then use them all together, which is basically the same concept of taking this integer, taking this string and parsing it to an integer. It's a form of casting, but it's called upcasting and downcasting through the hierarchy. In object orientation, this is called typecasting, because we're taking one type and casting it to another type. Excellent tangent. Any other questions on this example before we move on? Is it break time? Because now we're going to switch into Android next. Do we want break before Android? Yes. Let's take a 5 to 10 minute break. I promised I'd give you more breaks. So I'm going to stop this section here.